This week, Anthony Albanese left the comforts of his high approval rating at home, landing in the Pacific hoping to sign historic defence agreements.
It's been a busy week this week.
But he has now returned empty-handed, with the influence of China looming large over negotiations.
The government hoped to emerge from the Pacific over the last 2 weeks holding aloft two documents or two treaties.
With no diplomatic win in his pocket, Albanese now heads to the US, where a meeting with Donald Trump has all but been confirmed.
You know, your leader is coming over to see me very soon. I'm going to tell him about
But it came in a very Trumpian circumstance, as he attacked veteran ABC journalist John Lyons for simply asking a question. Today, I'm talking to Head of Newsroom Mike Ticher, Deputy Editor Gabrielle Jackson and Political Editor Tom Mcllroy about the tricky tests that Albanese faces overseas. Good morning, Mike.
Hey, Bridie.
Good morning, Gabrielle, and welcome back to the Friday show.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Bridie.
It is so great to have you here. And saving our newest editor for last, good morning and congratulations to our newly appointed political editor, Tom Mcllroy.
Thanks, Bridie. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you.
We've got quite a bit to step through today. I am going to start with the Prime Minister's exploits in the Pacific. We've talked about how Anthony Albanese was doing quite well domestically, while the coalition are making headlines for all the wrong reasons. But overseas could be a different story. He's got a lot of visits going on, and we're going to go through all of them. Let's start off first off with Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu. What has happened there?
The PM was in Port Moresby for the celebrations marking the 50th anniversary of PNG's independence from Australia, a couple of days up there, and they were expecting to sign this major defence treaty elevating PNG to a formal alliance with Australia, up there with the US and New Zealand, and also integrating defence forces and agreeing to defend each other in event of military conflict. Unfortunately for Anthony Albanese, awkwardly, the treaty wasn't ready. The PNG government had some wobbles at the last moment and Cabinet had not cleared the language. So they came away, instead of with a major agreement, with a very small communique, a few hundred words on a piece of paper. It's been a delicate one and an awkward one for him, but he insists that the treaty will get over the line.
But also this came straight after a sort of strikingly similar chain of events in Vanuatu, where they had also been touting that they were going to sign a $500 million deal with another Pacific Island nation. Here I am on my way to sign it. Turns out it wasn't ready. It didn't get signed either. So neither deal in itself is a huge disaster, but together, I guess you could say it wasn't the best start to this big round-the-world trip, because in some ways this might have been the easiest part.
Now, taking a step back from that, what does China have to do with these defence treaties and our relationships with places like Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu in general?
China's the country that underlies all of these deals. They're being very expansionist in the Pacific. They're making infrastructure deals. They're providing loans and funding to governments around the region. And Australia is trying to push back a little bit on that and make sure that we remain the security partner of choice to these countries, to use the phrase. I think China's a real player in these delays, and some ministers in both governments have hinted that the ability to make deals with China should stay on the table. So I think it's an element, and I think Beijing will be pleased that Australia is having difficulty getting these signatures over the line.
It's a big question for Australia, isn't it? I think the way it approaches diplomacy in the Pacific going forward. I think even the perception of any kind of agreement which says you kind of with Australia or with China could be really damaging. The Greens call this approach neo-colonial. I don't think a lot of people would agree with that characterisation, but it's clear that some critics in those countries did see it that way. So I think Australia has to be really careful in not putting forward agreements that kind of say it's either us or them.
So Albanese was very careful to stress PNG's sovereignty in this case, and obviously symbolically being there for the anniversary of their actual independence, so he could hardly do otherwise. And he tried to frame that as a positive approach to the Pacific. We're not the ones making the decisions here. It's a partnership of equals and all that kind of language, which is all true and fine. but it did kind of come across as a sort of rapid cobbling together of means to justify why something that the Australian government had heavily trailed would happen had not in fact happened.
He was also at pains to point out, and as was James Marape, the PNG Prime Minister, that PNG approached Australia with this treaty in mind. It wasn't coming from Australia to the government of PNG. The experts I spoke to yesterday, people like at the Lowy Institute and Australian National University, broadly say that these things will get over the line. It just takes a bit more time. They said that the Pacific way is to keep talking and pushing in the right direction, even if it takes a little bit longer. Probably our political system here and even our media doesn't really operate on that principle. So we were quick to point out that this was the second such failure. I think the government will be keen to get a deal maybe in the remaining months of this year or perhaps early next year.
It's interesting to see the soft power levers they're pulling too, isn't it, Tom? The rugby league deal in PNG, I thought, was kind of a masterstroke. I think Australia has a lot of cultural advantages in the Pacific in terms of language and religion and whatnot. And that soft power seems to me like a really good way to kind of win hearts and minds and be seen as the natural partner of choice.
Yeah, and the political strategy, the foreign policy strategy that Anthony Albanese and people like Penny Wong and Pat Conroy have been pursuing since they came to government a few years ago is to show up repeatedly in capitals around the region, to be in people's faces, making people-to-people links and trying to bring the Pacific perspective into Australia more and more. I think that strategy is working. They were coming off a low base under the coalition. Climate change is obviously an important tool of that diplomacy, that strategy. But yes, I agree with you, Gabs. The rugby league team thing probably has much more cut through in PNG than any other aspect of these deals. And Anthony Albanese is obviously very invested in it personally. He really believes that having an NRL team representing PNG will be a big step forward in relations between Australia and PNG.
They basically announced it every 6 months for the past 3 years. So,
yep.
And so they're very, very invested in it.
After leaving the Pacific Islands, Albanese will now jet off to New York for the UN General Assembly. Gabrielle, what do you think he needs to do there?
Well, in terms of the Pacific, I think he really has to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Pacific Island leaders and really throw his weight behind the COP31 talks. He will meet with the Turkish president on the sidelines of the UN, I think, and this is a real chance for him to, show that leadership. We know the Pacific Islands care about the climate change issue. We know that it's an existential crisis for them. We know they really want to host COP31. And, reporting indicates that most people believe that in order to get it over the line, Albanese will really have to, put on a big charm offensive.
Yeah, the Pacific countries have said they don't see it as Australia's hosting the climate change summit. They see it as a Pacific event as well. And so they're completely invested in that. And yeah, if it turns out after all the talk that has seemed like Australia was going to get it and host it, in the end it doesn't happen, that will not look great. I think it may not be entirely Australia's fault. Turkey's been very obdurate about wanting to put a spoke in that wheel, I think. But whatever the reasons, I think it's not going to be a great look if we end up not hosting it. I don't know what you think about that, Tom.
I think Labor's increasingly concerned about whether they can get this bid over the line. The challenge for the government here is that the decision is made through a consensus approach, and there's kind of no way to force a resolution if Turkey stays in the race. That's something we'll be watching really closely at the UN next week.
There is also a perception, though, that Albanese hasn't really put enough weight behind it yet.
They're quick to push back on that. He says that as the Prime Minister, he's been making high-level interventions in this race, that people like Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister, Chris Bowen, the Energy and Emissions Minister, have been engaging as much as possible around the world. Some of the diplomatic community here in Canberra back them up on that. I've spoken to a couple of people who look, to put it bluntly, are almost getting sick of hearing from people like Chris Bowen to try and get this deal over the line. Whether or not Anthony Albanese can get the deal done in New York next week will be interesting, but I don't know. I think there's still some water to go under the bridge here. I'll be interested to see how it plays out.
Do you think he's actually going to meet Donald Trump while he's in America as well, Mike?
Obviously, that's their plan. Donald Trump this week, as an aside, in his sort of confrontational exchange with the ABC journalist John Lyons, very strongly implied that he was going to meet Albanese, or at least that he planned to. But that incident in itself has kind of thrown another sort of element into the conversation between Australia and America. And as we know, Trump is completely unpredictable. Don't ask me to predict what he's going to do, or don't ask anyone else to predict what he's going to do, because we just don't know. But all things being equal, they are due to meet shortly. And if they don't, then that is going to become another story.
Yeah, it'll be a very big challenge for Anthony Albanese if a meeting doesn't happen here in the coming days. I think once he gets to New York, there'll be plenty of opportunities for a quick informal meeting with Donald Trump, whether it's that, a pull aside at one of the set piece events of the UN General Assembly, or if they have a formal bilateral meeting, will be interesting to see. I must say, I think it is going to happen. Certainly there's been a lot of effort put into trying to lock in Donald Trump, and I agree with Mike. I think the reference that the president made during that exchange with the ABC journalist John Lyons the other day signalled pretty strongly that they will be meeting.
They might just have a happenstance encounter, who knows?
He might just want to tell on John Lyons, and that's the end of it.
Trump has just been in the UK, where the royal family have really rolled out the red carpet for him. There's been a state banquet. But are there risks in looking too much like you're trying to appease Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think Keir Starmer is seeing that firsthand this week, that a lot of people really dislike Donald Trump and see efforts by governments around the world to cozy up to him or to have a more traditional relationship leader to leader is pretty unpopular. I think the balance of the equation here for Anthony Albanese is slightly different. He's copping a lot of heat for the fact that they haven't met. We're 8 months or so into Donald Trump's new term in the White House, and the fact that we can't get in a room with the leader of our closest ally is a problem politically. I think he's going to have to walk a fine line once he gets into the room. There's big things on the agenda: AUKUS, defence spending, trade, tariffs, that kind of stuff. Equally, he won't want to be seen back here in Australia to be sucking up to the US president or being overly deferential. I think politically that could be a bad look.
The fact that they haven't had a meeting is obviously not playing brilliantly for him here, but equally having an actual meeting could play much worse, potentially, depending on what happens there. We've seen with Trump's encounters with other world leaders that they've gone disastrously badly. And there's no big issue on the cards where it seems obviously likely to go badly, but who knows? Again, with Trump, anything could happen.
He'll be hoping very much it's not recorded on camera, though, right?
That could be the opportunity of a slightly more informal meeting. There's receptions and all kinds of stuff happening once they get to New York. I could imagine that this thing happens, we get a kind of readout, a statement, some photos distributed, and look, he's had his first meeting, that they've cleared that hurdle, it's out of the way. Something well shy of one of these big Oval Office sit-downs where there's a huge press spray at the end of it. I suspect that Anthony Albanese and Keir Starmer have been talking a lot about this. Starmer seems to have worked out a calculation, a kind of operating mode to deal with Trump, stroking his ego a little bit, reminding the US president of the strength of the alliance and the importance of it, how much the UK government wants to work with the US, bit of flattery to seal the deal. I could imagine that model being transferred to Anthony Albanese. Whether he can pull it off will be fascinating.
The defence announcements they've made in the past couple of weeks presumably will go to that, the Ghost Sharks and the Henderson shipyard in WA, where they're investing, the headline figure is $12 billion, although it won't start to come on stream for a few years. But, it very much seems like they're trying to give the impression of spending more on defence, if not as much as Donald Trump has asked all the NATO and other allies to do.
But the failure to secure those Pacific deals for someone like Donald Trump may be also a mark against Albanese.
I think dollars and cents will be really persuasive. You know, if Donald Trump can be convinced of anything, it's through money. I agree that the AUKUS announcements and the drone announcement that the government made in the last week or so will be interesting. We're obviously still a long way short of 3.5% of GDP going to defence, which is what the Trump people are demanding of Australia. I think Anthony Albanese's been alluding to strengthening defence and strengthening relationships is the formulation of words he's been using. I think that's all about Donald Trump.
One thing we haven't talked about is the vote of the UN on recognition of Palestine, which Australia has said it will support. That's obviously hugely controversial here, but they've, prefigured that already several months ago. So there shouldn't be too many surprises out of that, but it will be highlighted again. Something else he has to manage. He'd probably like to come out of this trip with relationships improved, if anything, or on an even keel. No big disasters, no faux pas, no snubs. The ABC issue, Mike, is sort of a new thing in that. There's just more news as we record breaking on Thursday that the ABC has been excluded from Trump's press conference in London. Presumably that has something to do with the previous interaction with John Lyons. That issue may go somewhere else. He might have to smooth that over and explain how that the ABC is not a government, propaganda unit in Australia.
And just on Starmart, now this would have been a crazy question 12 months ago, but are there risks in Albanese going to the UK and meeting with him?
It's all going really, really badly. The Labor Party conference is coming up. I guess Albanese will just want to steer clear of all that stuff as much as possible. They have lots of other things in common, obviously, traditional alliance, AUKUS, all that kind of stuff. They see eye to eye on Ukraine and many other issues. He just won't want to be associated with how the government is actually tracking in the UK, which you'd think normally that should be manageable, frankly.
Given everything we've just talked about, does Albanese need a win coming back from New York? If he comes back to Australia with a rockier relationship with the US and having to fail to secure our relationship with the Pacific, does that have an impact for him at home?
I think the coalition will be ready to pounce if there's any further complications in the relationship with Trump. Even if it goes well, they'll probably have some criticism of Anthony Albanese, obviously. I think this is a long prime ministerial trip. It's potentially 10 days across two countries. I think Anthony Albanese will be working hard to try and land pretty carefully here. I think a bad trip or negative headlines around it would be very frustrating for the government at this point.
On the other hand, the coalition is in its own big mess. And like you talked about on the podcast last week, they are very much distracted by their own internal debates. So how much their criticism lands and changes the wider Australian public opinion is to be seen.
Good point.
I think if he comes back at the end of this whole trip with just a breaking even with an equal outcome, no disasters, they'll be pretty satisfied with that, and they can return to the more simple problems of sorting out the housing crisis and the energy transition.
And now it's time for what we can't get out of our heads this week. What was that for you, Mike?
So my escape hatch this week from the world of news has been the World Athletics Championships. It's like the best of humanity. It's like how you would model humanity for children or for a United States president, say. It's like it's groups of incredibly talented young people coming together, wildly diverse from all parts of the globe, coming together, putting themselves through astonishing physical feats, and then displaying all the emotions of triumph, disappointment, everything, and then at the end, congratulating each other, commiserating with each other, being incredibly supportive. Just being incredibly Pollyanna about it, but that's how I'm going to read it because I need a bit of that at the moment. And there have been some great individual stories. It's been fantastic.
Just it's the absolute best parts of sports. It's why we love sports.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. I needed that this week. I'm getting emotional just listening to you. Gabrielle, what about you? What can't you get out of your head this week?
Well, I can't get out of my head an opinion article The Guardian read about Sabrina Carpenter. And I love Sabrina Carpenter. I love her music. I think she's fantastic. And I thought it was going to be a nice little joyful break from the depressing news. But the piece called What Sabrina Carpenter Gets Right About Gen Z's Gender Divide was written by some masculinity researchers, which turned out to be incredibly depressing. And it's all about how her music kind of echoes the, sheer frustration that Gen Z women have about dating emotionally unavailable men. And all I want to say is you have my deepest sympathies, Gen Z women, because dating was hard in my day and now it sounds terrible.
I don't think Gen Z is the first generation to discover emotionally unavailable men. But maybe they'll solve it. Tom, what can't you get out of your head this week?
Well, Robert Redford, a style icon, one of the Hollywood greats of probably all time, died this week. My escape from the news has been looking at some of the pictures of his incredible fashion choices over the years. I'm stunned that in costume, on set, as well as in everyday life, he looks so good in almost everything he wears. I think there's a masculinity about it. I think there's a kind of everyman style about it, even though he's a Hollywood movie star. And I must say the photos from All the President's Men, where he's playing a glamorous journalist in the Washington Post heyday, was pretty inspiring. I've really enjoyed the escapism of articles about Robert Redford as a style icon.
I've also enjoyed the anecdotes about him being told by a director, okay, so you've just struck out with a woman and you've got to channel that emotion. And Robert being like, I've what? What do you mean? And not getting what it would feel like to strike out. It has been lovely to look back on his life and career and close. Thank you so much for joining me this week, Tom.
Thanks, Bridie.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Bridie.